tracking. So if you guys are looking to get into ult tracking just a little bit for your own team's utility, it can be actually super impactful. First life hack, having a general estimate of the ult charge for different heroes can be helpful, but it's not necessarily 100% necessary. In other words, it's helpful knowing that if I look up Winston Overwatch, right, and I go onto his wiki, I'll pull it up right here, and I go down to Ultimate, right, it's helpful knowing 1850 points is the ult cost. In other words, it's going to take, I think 1850, 1850 damage point wise to be able to charge up his ultimate. Now the reason why this can be tricky is because, remember, tanks feed less ult points. So if I do 1850 damage to a squishy, I will have an ultimate. If I do 1850 damage points to a tank, I will not necessarily have my ultimate yet. Now to complicate matters even further, remember this: Winston passively generates 1% ult charge every 3 seconds. So you don't necessarily need to do this much damage. Remember, you just get passive ult charge anyway. So in other words, if I wanted to get 100% ult charge, I'd wait 5 minutes and I'd have my Primal Rage. So what you're going to need to learn to find is you need to get a general sense of two things. Number one, how fast a person generally charges their ultimate just based off of ultimate cost. For example, something like, oh, I'm about to get removed. For example, a hero like a Tracer doesn't require many ultimate points before she charges her pulse bomb. It's very cheap. In fact, let's actually look that up really fast. Tracer Overwatch, 1850 for Primal Rage. For Tracer, that's the one that everybody knows, it's only 1260. So Tracer builds her ult very, very, very quickly. Okay, so even if you aren't doing a lot of damage, you will build your ult very quickly because of the passive ult charge. So you need to know that. Which heroes take longer to farm, which ones take shorter to farm. And then the other thing that's helpful to know as well is also generally who is that hero usually shooting. For example, if I'm playing, I don't know, let me think of a good example for this one. Maybe like a Reaper, right? A Reaper, if you're playing it versus like a Winston or, I don't know, a Doomfist or a Junker Queen, might have a decent amount of damage, but if you think about how your Reaper might be playing, is your Reaper spending a lot of time shooting tanks? If he's spending a lot of time shooting tanks, then even though he has a lot of damage, remember, tanks feed less ult charge, so he's going to have less ult charge, period. Whereas a hero like a Sombra, or maybe a hero like a Tracer, which we talked about, is probably spending less time shooting tanks and more time shooting squishies, which guarantees a high ult charge generation because squishies feed full ult charge points. Remember, tanks feed less. So, all that being said, you have to not only have a general estimate of how fast your target generates ultimates, but you also need to know, was that target shooting mostly tanks, shooting mostly squishies, or a mixture of both? And then you're going to press tab, you're going to look at this, and you're going to go, okay, whoa, this Mercy was doing a lot of healing. You guys see how much healing this Mercy is? This Mercy definitely has Valk. This Zen was doing a pretty lot of healing and doing a decent amount of damage. This Zen plus passive ult charge probably has Trance. So on first fight, it's actually pretty easy to guess who, there it is, right? There's the Trance, right? He probably just got it about 10-15 seconds ago. So it's very easy to know based off of that. Now, this is where it gets tricky. That Zen used and built his Trance. He did a lot of healing with his Trance, so it's no longer reliable to use the scorecard to tell you how much ult charge this person has. For example, this Zen used Trance. How much of this healing is from that Trance? I don't know. Maybe 700, 600, 500? But remember, that ult charge from Trance doesn't count towards building the next ultimate. It's just in the void. So I would probably guess, based off of the amount of time it's been and the fact that, is Zen dead right now? I think Zen might be dead, right? So Zen's dead. So I could probably guess that Zen's probably at like 20% ult charge right now, right? He's not even close to building that next Trance. Whereas this Mercy, who's been constantly involved, there it is. You see it? She has built another Valk because she's been constantly involved. But I'm not reading that based off of stats because it's now gotten to a point where it's impossible to read stats anymore. It's gotten so glutted and so messy after the first fight. A second, third, fourth, fifth fight and so on gets harder and harder and harder. But I can generally feel that person's contribution, and that just comes through practice. Now, there was one exception to that rule. If this was Koth, Escort, any sort of game mode where there's a stop and a reset, you could, if these stats freeze, you can memorize, okay, this is where we were at. Okay, I will know if they get to around 3,000 damage on the next round of Koth, that they probably have their ultimate. Yes, you get less ult charge for healing and damaging a tank. Yeah. So you can generally memorize what they were before the round started and make that adjustment accordingly. Last thing I'll say is generally just trying to get a read of how much the previous target did the previous fight. Was there a lot of healing going on from that one target? Did that one target do a lot of damage? Did that target die? Remember, if you're dead, you're not getting ult charge. So if you got somebody in the enemy team that has been dying or feeding a lot, they probably don't have their ult yet, or they're going to be very slow to building that next ultimate. So all that being said, the way to ult track is to have a good read of opening stats for the first ult, but more importantly, getting a better feel of how the enemy counterpart is charging their ultimate. And what we always say, I think Jane was very popular with saying this, and I think it's a good way of starting, is it's better to start ult tracking one at a time. Pick even just your enemy counterpart right now, like the enemy tank, the enemy DPS, enemy support, and try to get a feel of how close you think they are to the ultimate, and then try and do something with that information. Remember, ult tracking is only as useful as what you do with it, adjusting how you play, adjusting the play style, adjusting the game plan accordingly. If I'm playing D.Va, for example, which is what we're about to coach, and I get a feeling that Reaper has done a lot of damage onto a lot of people, not just my tanks, then that might adjust how I use my Matrix, because I want to make sure that I have Matrix for Death Blossom. So you should pick one character you want to track and watch them specifically. I wouldn't even say watch them specifically. Like, I wouldn't but I would, between fights, take the time to think about their contribution and see if you can predict whether they're going to have ultimate or not. And even if you don't necessarily do anything with that information immediately, what it can do is eventually you'll get to a point where you can do it more consistently, and then you can actually do something with that.